Today, the Ruby Princess cruise ship named as the likely source of Tasmania's deadly coronavirus outbreak. Western Australia's state of emergency is extended for another 14 days while other states begin to ease restrictions. After 36 years of public service, a tearful Mike Kelly steps down from Parliament due to health reasons.
The problem is that I'll be having more procedures coming up this year and probably ongoing, in the months and years ahead.
And looking through the lens during the lockdown, photographers document a unique moment in time. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. An investigation into the coronavirus outbreak in Tasmania's northwest has found it most likely originated from the Ruby Princess cruise ship. The finding comes as the state records its 12th COVID-19 death, an 86-year-old woman. Here's reporter Erin Cooper.
This morning, the state government released a long-awaited report into how the northwest outbreak happened. Now, of course, the northwest outbreak has created 146 coronavirus cases, 81 of those among health workers. The report concluded that the most likely cause of the outbreak was 2 Ruby Princess cruise ship passengers who were hospitalised at the Northwest Regional Hospital, and then that virus spread to healthcare workers in that facility. They said part of the reason that may have been the case is because staff at the hospital are highly mobile. They often work between various different wards and indeed between other hospitals. They also said that half of the workers continued to go to work while they were symptomatic. 77% went to work where they were infectious, even if they weren't symptomatic. Now, Premier Peter Gutwein was at pains to point out this morning that this report isn't about blame, it's about having better and stronger infection controls moving forward. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
No passenger is to blame, and no healthcare worker is to blame. This is just simply a case of people going about their lives, going about their jobs, while this dreadful set of circumstances has ensued and has wreaked havoc and misery on so many people.
And Erin, what's the latest on the situation in the whole of the state?
Ros, I'm here at the Burnie Airport where Australian Defence Force and AUSMAT personnel are boarding a Defence Force flight. They're leaving the state after managing the emergency department at the Northwest Regional Hospital for the last 2 weeks. Of course, it was closed while a lot of those healthcare workers were put into mandatory 14-day quarantine. The hospital was handed back to employees yesterday, though the majority of the facility does still remain closed. In terms of total cases, there are now 219 in Tasmania, with just 1 confirmed overnight. That was a female worker from the northwest. And unfortunately, as you mentioned in the introduction, there has been another death. A northwest woman, 86 years old, passed away overnight. She was at the Mersey Community Hospital. That now takes the total death toll in Tasmania to 12. 11 of those deaths occurred on the northwest coast. Ros?
Erin, thank you. There are 2 new coronavirus cases in New South Wales, bringing the total number of infections in the state to just over 3,000. Reporter Lily Mayers has more.
Of the 2 new cases, one is a contact of a confirmed case and the other is under investigation. We know that there are no new cases at the Newmarch Aged Care Home in Western Sydney today. There have been 12 people, residents of the aged care home, who have died there. The total cases at the nursing home remains at 56, including 22 staff and 34 residents who were infected. Of the state's cases, 15 people are being treated in intensive care units right now, and 13 of those require ventilators. The New South Wales Chief Health Officer, Dr Kerry Chant, says more than 12,000 people have now recovered from coronavirus. Here's a little of what she had to say this morning.
We now have 3,016 confirmed cases in New South Wales, and pleasingly 2,284 people have actually recovered from COVID-19, and we continue to follow up patients after their recovery, and those recovery figures are likely to climb significantly.
Lily, today is the last day of strict social gathering restrictions in the state, so what can we expect from tomorrow?
That's right, Ros. From tomorrow, 2 adults will be able to visit a separate household at one time. There are, of course, other changes that kicked in this week. Schools went back virtually yesterday, and we're expecting students to have a more staggered return from May the 11th. The Premier has also said she's pleased to see retail stores reopening, where social distancing is possible. So from tomorrow we will see a bit more of a freedom of movement, and as the Premier said, it will help make New South Wales look like a very different place.
Thanks, Lily. The Northern Territory has today become the first Australian jurisdiction to unveil a comprehensive exit strategy from coronavirus restrictions. From tomorrow, Territorians will be free to attend large gatherings like weddings and funerals, as well as go camping, fishing and play golf. Under NT Chief Minister Michael Gunner's plan, by early June, all businesses will reopen. Reporter Matt Garrick takes us through what restrictions will be relaxed from tomorrow.
Look, they've made some monumental changes which are coming into effect tomorrow of relaxing restrictions, probably the biggest of which are restrictions on large gatherings, including weddings and funerals. Religious and personal outdoor ceremonies are now allowed from tomorrow. So the Chief Minister has said in a press conference just a little while ago that while there won't be any fixed limit on how many people can come to
We're breaking in to take you live to Wagga Wagga in New South Wales now, where the Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack is speaking.
Of course, for those 90 or so Australian families who've lost a loved one, that is a tragedy for them. And again, our sympathies, our condolences go out to them. But when you compare the Australian death rates, compare the Australian case rates to those being experienced overseas, it just goes to show how well Australians have complied with the requests made by the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, and other medical officers around the nation. I want to particularly also thank at a local level Jill Ludford and the way she's led the Murrumbidgee Local Health District. We've had 45 cases, sadly one death, but 39 of those cases have recovered. 39 of those cases have recovered, and it shows that with social distancing, with people staying at home, particularly at Anzac Day, when it must have been difficult for veterans and others not to want to go to a public march or even just to go down to the cenotaph and lay a wreath. Most people stayed at home and did the right thing, and that's commendable. Of course, tomorrow we've got the Wagga Wagga Gold Cup, first run in 1873. This will be the first time in the Cup's history that there won't be a crowd present at the Murrumbidgee Turf Club. And I know that'll be difficult for punters too. Of course, they can watch online and do all the sorts of things that they normally do to get their bets on and to watch the races. But Wagga Wagga Gold Cup week is one of the biggest weeks for Wagga's social and sporting fortunes, and certainly for our businesses it is the biggest week. For our motels, for our accommodation places, and for our places which serve the great hospitality that we're always used to, Wagga Wagga Cup week is the biggest week of the year. And unfortunately this year the pubs are shut, cafes are only doing takeaway, and the Murrumbidgee Turf Club will be a very quiet, silent place tomorrow, apart from the thundering hooves of the Cup field at 4:20 when they thunder around that 2,000 metres with nobody watching. But I wish the Murrumbidgee Turf Club good luck. I wish Jeff Harrison, the president of the Murrumbidgee Turf Club, good luck. It's his first cup and there's no crowd. But knowing Jeffrey, he'll be down there. He'll be cheering on the runners, and he'll be doing his utmost to ensure that the Murrumbidgee Turf Club continues that proud tradition that it has since the 1870s. Happy to take any questions.
Deputy Prime Minister, I'd like to ask you about the resignation of Dr Mike Kelly from the seat of Eden Monaro today. First of all, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've phoned Mike Kelly and I've wished him all the very best. I'm very good friends with Mike Kelly, and I know that he's made such a great contribution to Australian life. Not just in his military career, rising to the rank of colonel, but also in his 10 years as a parliamentarian. He has served the people of southern New South Wales very, very well. And during the bushfire crisis, the summer of hell that we had, that we endured, he was unable to, on many occasions, get out and about to visit those areas of his electorate in the Riverina area. I'm talking about Batlow and Tumbarumba specifically, and so I went up there and represented him and represented the Australian government and made it quite clear that this was above politics. And Mike and I have always done things above politics. We might be philosophically opposed at times in question time, but we are good mates. I wish him all the very best. I know that he has undergone a number of operations due to dehydration, suffered in Iraq and Somalia. He's given his utmost to the Australian people, to the Australian Army, and certainly to representing his constituents in southern New South Wales. I wish him and his family all the very best. I've reached out to him today, and I look forward to catching up with him as soon as I can.
If John Barilaro is to enter the race for the seat of Eden Monaro and end up in the federal party room, would you welcome his arrival?
Well, of course, and I'd love to see another National Party face in our party room, and the National Party will be contesting the seat. We'll be contesting Eden Monaro. We've never won the seat. We've never won it. It's a federation seat. There've been 11 members of that particular electorate, but it'll be up to the branches, and it'll be up to the Federal Electorate Council of that electorate as to whom they decide to go forward for the National Party. I appreciate that Scott Morrison has talked to me about the seat. The Liberals will run it. Of course, Labor will run. This is a test for Anthony Albanese. No government has taken a seat in a by-election in 100 years from the opposition. The opposition has won those by-elections. It's been 158 by-elections since Federation in 1901, and only once in Kalgoorlie in 1920 has a government won a by-election from the opposition. And so, there's a bit of history there, a bit of history going against the government, and so this is very much a test for Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party, this by-election.
Wouldn't the entry of John Barilaro into the party room destabilise your leadership? I mean, a man who gives up Deputy Premier to enter federal politics, is of course going to have ambitions.
Well, he's got to do it again. He's got to do it, and I know John will be discussing this with his wife, Deanna, and family over the weekend. And look, if he decides to put his hand up, he's got to go through the pre-selection process. That's always the case with every National Party member. We are the most democratic party in all of Australia. The locals get to decide who's going to be their candidate. Got to go through that process, and then of course has to go through a by-election process, which is not easy. As I've just said, 100 years of history is there, and history has a habit of repeating itself. Let's see what happens.
So you're not worried about his entry?
Well, I look, if John wants to put his hand up and run, of course I'll support him. Of course I'll support him. I'll support any National Party member who puts their hand up for that seat. We need a good local person to run in that seat and to contest that seat and hopefully win that seat. And John certainly is a good local candidate. I'm sure there'll be possibly others as well who want to put their hand up and run for that seat.
Would you have any concerns about his very differing opinions on the Murray-Darling Basin plan, for example?
Well, John doesn't have very different plans for the Murray-Darling Basin. John and I agree that farmers need water. Add water, grow agriculture, grow the nation's finances. That's always been the case. Remember too that I was the one National Party member. I was the one of very few people who crossed the floor to oppose the Murray-Darling Basin plan way back when it was first put into the Parliament. And I've always supported the farmers. I've always supported the irrigators. There has to be balance in the Murray-Darling Basin plan. There has to be balance. There has to be a triple bottom line approach, and that's what I've always said, and that's what I've adhered to.
Would you like to see Tumut return to the seat of Riverina, because that border's moved a few times east and west?
Well, that's up to the Electoral Commission, and we'd all like to see certain things in our borders. I'm very happy with the electorate that I have. It's a fantastic electorate I have. I have 12 great local government areas. But that's up to the Electoral Commission. They look at those, they revisit those every 2 terms. I appreciate that another revisit of the borders is not far away, but again, that's up to the Electoral Commission, and they look at population, they look at all those sorts of things, they look at communities of interest, and they make their determinations based on that. I love Tumut. I love representing Tumut and Tumbarumba, Snowy Valleys Council. I'm very close to. I speak to James Hayes every week and I've continued to do that, even though it's not in my electorate as such. But similarly with Griffith, many Griffith people, even though they're very well represented by Susan Lee, because I represented the area for 6 years, often call me, often seek my support and advice, and I'm happy to give it to them. I am the Deputy Prime Minister, so in essence, I don't just represent the Riverina election, I represent all regional Australians, and I'm happy to do that. I can't hear that. Is that down here? Yep.
Phone call there for the Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack speaking in Wagga in regional New South Wales. He paid tribute to the resignation to Mike Kelly, who resigned today, the Labor MP for Eden Monaro, speaking warmly about him, saying their friendship was above politics. And he said he'd welcome the New South Wales Nationals leader John Barilaro running in the upcoming by-election. That is latest from Michael McCormack, the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, Western Australia has recorded no new cases of coronavirus in the past 24 hours. The total number of cases remains at 551, with 8 deaths in the state. Premier Mark McGowan says the state of emergency has been extended for another 2 weeks.
Clearly, we are, along perhaps with South Australia and the Northern Territory, leading the nation. We have a total of 507 recoveries, meaning we now have only 36 active cases in Western Australia. And as you know, half of those are from the Artenia cruise ship or from over east. So our numbers of active West Australian cases are now very, very low. I can also announce that yesterday the Emergency Services Minister signed a further extension for our state of emergency for another 14 days, which is a requirement under the Act that is regularly extended if we want to keep it in place, which obviously we do, and that's been extended for another 14 days. The current extension means the state of emergency will expire at midnight on the 13th of May, unless it's renewed, and I expect, of course, it will be renewed at that point in time. This is a reminder, of course, that we're not through what's been occurring as yet, and everyone needs to continue to listen to the advice and be understanding and have patience.
The ACT is the first Australian jurisdiction to eliminate all known cases of COVID-19. After 5 consecutive days without a new case, ACT Health has announced the last 2 cases have fully recovered. In the 7 weeks since Canberra's first infection, the city recorded 106 positive cases. 3 people have died and the other 103 have recovered. And we are expecting to hear from the ACT Health Minister for an update later in the Bulletin, which of course we shall bring to you live. The federal government is playing down the presence of a Chinese diplomat at a press conference with the health minister yesterday, as the relationship between China and Australia continues to be debated. Mining magnate and philanthropist Andrew Forrest invited the Chinese official along to the event and has accused the media of beating up the story. Political reporter Matthew Doran has more from Parliament House.
It was a fairly curious spectacle in Melbourne yesterday, with the Health Minister Greg Hunt standing next to Andrew Twiggy Forrest as he announced that he had secured 10 million more coronavirus testing kits and the associated pathology equipment from China. But the pair weren't alone. They were also joined by China's Consul General in Melbourne, who also addressed the media. The press conference went as press conferences do, but when journalists wanted to start asking questions of the Consul General, the press conference was ended, and the Health Minister Greg Hunt, flanked by Mr Forrest and the diplomat from China, went to leave the room. Greg Hunt originally said that people could ask questions of the diplomat outside the room before leaving, and it has sparked some suggestion that maybe he was blindsided by the appearance of the Consul General at that press conference. Certainly, that's the opinion of one of his backbench colleagues, the Liberal MP and former ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma, who said that it would have been quite the surprise. Matt Canavan, former minister, now Nationals backbencher, has told radio stations in Sydney this morning that he's questioning Andrew Forrest's motives for inviting the diplomat along to that press conference. But Twiggy Forrest himself says it's not a big deal. He says he would have invited a representative of the government government, regardless of what country it was that he was able to secure these testing kits from. Had it been China, Japan, any other country, he would have tried to ensure that they had representation at that announcement. And in fact, he's suggested that this is something of a beat-up, that the journalists had made Greg Hunt grumpy, and that was the reason why the press conference ended in the way that it did. It is worth pointing out that this is something of a curiosity, considering the ongoing debate about Australia and Chinese relations over the last few days, sparked by those calls from the Australian government for an independent and thorough investigation into the coronavirus pandemic. But Twiggy Forrest this morning on 7 said that the media had blown this way out of proportion.
Yeah, the minister did walk out looking a bit grumpy, and the media's just jumped all over that. It's been amazing to watch. He looked a bit grumpy because a journo almost tried to trip him up to stop him leaving and ask him a whole heap of questions, and he refused. And he said, no, you can take that up with China or Andrew or me outside of this. And he walked out. Yeah, he walked out like he meant to walk out, but that had nothing to do with the press conference.
Matthew, Parliament is examining the federal government's response to the coronavirus crisis. What have we learnt today about the number of people seeking unemployment benefits?
Well, the Department of Social Services are giving evidence to the COVID-19 Senate Committee today. This committee was set up because Parliament isn't sitting in its usual way, so the Senate took it upon itself to set up this committee and scrutinise matters that would otherwise be discussed in normal parliamentary sittings. This department has said that the number of Australians receiving unemployment benefits has jumped by more than 500,000 people in the last 2 months as the coronavirus crisis continues to cripple the Australian economy. The number of job seekers receiving support jumped from 815,000 at the end of February through to 1.3 million Australians last week, and the forward projections are that that number could continue to rise to 1.7 million people by September. So that really is indicative of just how difficult this situation is for many Australians who have found themselves out of work, with many businesses struggling to keep their doors open throughout this crisis, and these people are now seeking access to those increased unemployment benefits that the government outlined as part of its coronavirus response. Whether or not they are able to get employment at the end of this crisis remains to be seen, with many economists suggesting that once a job is lost in any sort of economic downturn, some of them never reappear once the situation eases. Ros?
Matthew, thank you. The number of coronavirus deaths across the UK has exceeded 26,000. For the first time, the latest figures include all deaths linked to the virus, including fatalities in care homes and other community settings.
Happier times for Betty, celebrating her 97th birthday. She's now in critical care in hospital with coronavirus. Her daughter Andrea says she picked up the virus in a nursing home, and testing at an earlier stage for residents and staff might have kept her safe.
I think it's a bit late. I think that coronavirus, if the truth be known, is endemic in our nursing homes, and the people that are going to suffer the most are the elderly and the vulnerable, not to mention the staff.
Testing for all care home residents and staff, including those without symptoms, has now been made available, either with kits sent to the homes or mobile units visiting them. There have been warnings, though, that carrying out the tests won't be easy.
It's the physicality of some of these people. They are so frail that actually doing the test itself, it takes a lot of time. It takes time to sit and explain it. It takes time to reassure them. It takes time afterwards to explain it again.
I asked about the new care home testing plan at the Downing Street media briefing.
Couldn't testing really have started sooner than now?
The scale and the speed of this epidemic is really in the last couple of weeks, and there is a huge national and local endeavour to both not just test, which is very important, but to also understand the measures that would make a difference in care homes, and to look at that in a very rapid way, looking at the evidence, so that we can put in place measures that protect people.
Drive-through testing or home kits have been made available to millions of others with symptoms, including Heather, who did her swab test at Taunton today.
Because I'm a private carer, I work for myself, so I couldn't get tested before today. and it is really important, not for me, but also for my clients.
Over 65s qualify for testing as well, like Mac and Anthea.
Well, we both had the symptoms for a few days, and so therefore we really wanted to get checked, but the symptoms hadn't increased, so we didn't need to phone the 111. But as soon as the test for over 65s, which we are, came available, we were quite happy to come and have the test.
Home test kits can be ordered online, but only by those with symptoms. We haven't opened the packaging of this one, so it is safe for future use. There are a couple of different types of home testing kit. This is one of them. Before you do anything, you need to register online and book the free courier collection service to come and pick it up. Then you take the swab sample from your nose and throat, put it in the plastic container and then the packaging, and it's ready to be collected. Slots for drive-through tests have been in high demand. Home test kits ran out earlier today, but with new supplies are bookable again this evening. The Health Secretary Matt Hancock has set a target of 100,000 tests a day by the end of this month, and that's tomorrow.
The US economy has suffered its worst contraction in more than a decade, shrinking nearly 5% in the first 3 months of this year. But despite the slump, stocks on Wall Street rallied following hopes of a potential treatment for COVID-19. Officials say there's clear-cut evidence an experimental antiviral drug can help people recover from the disease. North America correspondent James Glenday reports.
Remdesivir was originally developed to fight Ebola. It attacks an enzyme viruses need to replicate inside our cells, and for months doctors have wondered how well would it work on COVID-19.
The data shows that remdesivir has a clear-cut, significant positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery.
In a trial run by American researchers involving more than 1,000 hospitalised patients, the experimental antiviral drug reduced the duration of symptoms from 15 to 11 days, but the mortality rate only shrank slightly, from 11 to 8%.
What it has proven is that a drug can block this virus.
There are some patients who claim it's helped them.
I think that remdesivir gave it the extra jump start or kick start or whatever I needed to kind of turn that corner.
But the drug still needs to be reviewed, and the US results were released at the same time as details of an incomplete trial in China published in the Lancet Medical Journal suggested that it didn't work. Medical officials also stress that remdesivir is in no way a silver bullet because it can't stop people getting sick in the first place like a vaccine might. However, at the moment here, any promising news at all is warmly welcomed. Wall Street bounced on hopes of a potential treatment, even as data showed the US economy contracted by 4.8% in the first quarter, and forecasters warned GDP could shrink by 30% by the end of June. This nation's tolerance for lockdown measures is also clearly diminishing. A large Jewish funeral in Brooklyn, the latest event where police had to intervene.
It was thousands of people. Can we just have an honest conversation here? It was not acceptable. We will not tolerate it.
All the while, the official COVID-19 death toll continues to steadily rise. It's now past 60,000. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
Finance news now. Here's David Chow. So, David, Woolworths has experienced a big jump in sales due to the coronavirus.
That's right, very big jump. We're talking double digits here, Ros. So in the first quarter of this year, Woolworths sales jumped 11% to $16.5 billion. And a lot of it was to do with panic buying in fear of the coronavirus, like stockpiling toilet paper, tissue, pasta and rice. There was also a big spike in alcohol sales from its Endeavour drinks business. That alcohol sales rose 9.5% to $2.3 billion. And the government has acknowledged that these social isolation measures has resulted in a bit of a drinking problem, shall we say. So Woolworths has also warned of a cost blowout in the order of about $275 million because it had to, for example, hire 22,000 temporary staff to cope with extra demand, warehousing and increasing its online shopping offering. Interestingly, Brad Banducci, the CEO of Woolworths, had a press conference today and he got some questions about toilet paper sales, and here's what he had to say.
As demand has come down to more sensible levels, we're getting back into very good in-stock positions. The hot news, of course, the most important question you haven't asked is we're on track to sell in the order of 12 million toilet rolls this week. Normal demand, just so you know, is about 10.5, so we get in there. And I look forward to a photo with me at the end of the crisis with just a whole ton of toilet paper behind me. That's the way the crisis I'd like to see end.
I feel tempted to take him up on that offer. But yeah, so he has foreshadowed that sales are going to slow down as panic buying has sort of subsided. So the next quarter is probably only going to see single-digit growth. So Woolworths' share price has dropped a little today.
OK, now ANZ has announced a big fall in profit. Take us through it.
Sure. So it is a pretty big fall, Ros. So banks are not having a good year. ANZ's half-year profit dropped by 51%. That's half, down to $1.5 billion. And it's also deferred its decision on whether to pay a dividend, and if so, how much. So it set aside $1.7 billion provision for future bad debts, as it's expecting a lot of Australians to not be able to repay their loans, especially Australians who've lost their jobs or their businesses have closed down because of the government's tough social distancing measures to combat the coronavirus. It also wrote off $815 million because its Asian investments didn't bear fruit due to COVID-19. So as an indication, its dividend last year was 80 cents. So the fact that investors are not getting a dividend this year, possibly, that has upset them slightly. So that's why its share price did go down in the morning, but it has since rebounded as investors, I guess, decide to look to the positive.
The overall share market, David, today is up sharply. What's behind that?
Yeah, it's a very strong day for the Australian share market, Ros, and it seems it doesn't take very much to boost it, considering all the flow of bad coronavirus news. So, as we heard from James Glenday, there was a study from Gilead, a drug company, who has a medication called remdesivir. So, Gilead said that its trials are showing that remdesivir is having some positive effect on fighting coronavirus. So investors just snapped on that, hoping that it is true and that the studies hold up in future testing. And then there was also oil prices. Oil prices surged. There was a massive rebound because there was a smaller than expected rise in US inventories last week. But still went up, and we still have a massive oil oversupply problem in the world, especially since demand has dropped dramatically because of the coronavirus. So all in all, not great reasons for the stock market to go up, but investors just gave a positive spin on it. So looking at our share market, the ASX is following that wave of optimism. So the ASX 200 up 115 points. That's up about 2.3%. So it's now up 21% from its late March low, and it's down 23% from its February record high. So it's in both a bull and a bear market, interestingly enough. Now, taking a look at the top and bottom movers, the best performing stocks include mainly the energy sector after oil prices rebounded, and that boosted Worley, an engineering firm, by 14%. Mining giant Fortescue Metals up sharply. Likewise, of Australia's largest car dealership, AP Eagers, which laid off 1,200 workers and struck deals with about half its landlords to waive or defer rent. And that cost-cutting measure sent its share price surging 23%. And some of the worst performers today are mainly gold miners like Saracen Minerals. Woolworths is down slightly after announcing its sales results, and ANZ is now trading higher after spending the first half of today in the red. Now, in Asian markets, a bit of a mixed picture. New Zealand started to stay higher, but since fizzled out, down 1/4%. Hong Kong is up by 1/4% as well. Shanghai up by a solid 1.2%. And Japan is the best performer. It's jumped more than 2%. Now, in US markets, Wall Street lifted sharply overnight. Investors ignored the bad news that the US economy suffered its biggest contraction since the global financial crisis. GDP down almost 5% in the March quarter. Regardless, the Dow Jones put on 2.2%, the S&P up 2.7%, and the Nasdaq surged by 3.5%. Now, gold is steady at $1,712 an ounce, and oil markets have continued to rebound. The Brent crude price is up to $23.5 a barrel. West Texas buying $16.2 per barrel. Now, the Australian dollar was stronger overnight, but it's slipped a bit. Now it's buying 65.5 US cents. And that's the latest in finance news, Ros.
Thanks, David. The global shortage of personal protective equipment, testing kits and ventilators because of the coronavirus crisis has presented an opportunity for profiteers. And a snapshot of the dark web by ANU researchers has found these items on offer, as well as drugs marketed as cures for the virus and the blood of supposedly recovered coronavirus patients, all at a high price. Here's Professor Rod Broadhurst, the lead researcher of the study.
We did a survey of 20 large darknet markets back on April the 3rd, and what we found was about half a dozen of those markets, at least 3 of them dominated the sale of these COVID-19 related products. Mostly, almost half, were personal protection equipment. There was quite a lot, a third of them were what we would call antiviral repurposed medicines that are undergoing trial for the treatment of COVID-19. So there were the antimalarials, which have been touted in the past, and some of the HIV, AIDS, Ebola, and other antivirals that have been currently tested for their effectiveness against COVID-19. But perhaps the surprising was the amount of purported vaccines, cures and antidotes that were also available. And they were offered, some of them were offered at very high prices. We had one example claiming to have a vaccine sourced from Wuhan that was charging $24,000 for the delivery of that vaccine.
What about the blood of someone who's had the virus and recovered from it? Where did you find that, and what was that selling for?
Yeah, that's more of an inference because in the some of the darknet chat rooms, there's been discussion of where the likely, what the provenance or sources of these vaccines are, and we assume that they're either. Look, a couple of things I should say first. Number one is that a lot of these products are likely to be, or very likely to be, scams. They're likely to be fakes. However, based on the kind of traders that were offering these products, for want of a better word, their reputation in this sort of arena, we think we can't rule out the fact that some of the vaccines that may be on offer may actually be trial vaccines, or indeed, as we've heard in recent weeks, the harvesting of antibodies, COVID-19 antibodies from the plasma of recovered patients. And we understand that that kind of product is likely to be available, likely to be sourced as one of the cures and antidotes. So a lot of it will be scams, a lot of it will be entirely fake, but our past experience shows that not all of them will be fake.
But I suppose the concern, apologies for interrupting, Rod, the concern for people buying these items like the vaccines, experimental drugs, whether they be fake or stolen, is that they could be dangerous and people could take them and believe themselves immune.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of dangers. The one you've just pointed out, Ros, that they will take the vaccine, assume that they're immune, and in fact may indeed contract the virus. So that's one element of it. Another element of it is that the diversion of those kinds of short supply trial vaccines and repurposed antibodies and so on, they will have an impact as well, because those products are in very grave short supply, particularly the experimental drugs. So diversion, or stealing, if you like, from those kinds of environments, often those kinds of products that do end up on the darknet market and can fetch very high prices.
Rod, were you able to tell how much traffic was going through these sites during the time you were monitoring them? How much buying and selling was going on?
Unfortunately, we can't track buyer transactions with traders or vendors on these darknet markets. And bear in mind that the markets there, we're looking at the equivalent of a supermarket, I guess, in terms of the kind of scale of and variety of contraband that they provide. So they don't just sell drugs. They also we saw quite a lot of digital products, malware, ransomware, phishing attacks and so on that were essentially designed to allow cyber criminals.
We're interrupting there to take you live to Canberra, where the ACT Health Minister is giving an update.
Who have lost income, who have been impacted in regard to their mental health by the requirements of isolation and physical distancing in our community. We know that it's been tough, but we also know that it's been necessary. Here in the ACT and across Australia, we have managed so far to avoid the terrible scenes that we have seen in so many countries around the world, where health systems have been overwhelmed by this global pandemic. So today is an opportunity to say thank you to Canberrans and to all Australians for the hard work that you've been doing to help us slow the spread and flatten the curve for COVID-19. It's also an opportunity to say thank you very much to our really hard-working health protection units across the country, and in particular here for our health protection service in the ACT that's worked so hard on the tracking and tracing, on providing really excellent advice to Canberrans about what we all needed to do together to flatten the curve, and our health services that have worked really hard to ensure that we are now prepared if we do see a second wave of COVID-19 in Australia and here in the ACT. So thank you everyone, but also keep up the hard work. In particular, if you have symptoms of COVID-19, if you have a fever, a sore throat, a dry cough or shortness of breath, please take the opportunity to go and get tested for COVID-19. Tomorrow will be a week since we expanded the testing criteria to anyone with symptoms, and we're doing that for another week until next Friday. So we're really asking Canberrans, if you have symptoms, please take the opportunity to go and get tested at the Western Creek Walk-In Centre, at the drive-through at Epic, or yesterday the Commonwealth announced the opening of 2 new centres at Crace, at Your GP at Crace, and also at Lakeview in Tuggeranong. Those are GP-based practices where they will also undertake respiratory assessment and testing free of charge thanks to the Commonwealth's program. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Canberrans, you can also get tested at Winunga Nimitajar, which has a respiratory assessment centre there as well. So there are many options for getting tested here in the ACT, and I urge Canberrans, if you have symptoms, please go and get a test. We really, really want to understand if we have any undetected COVID-19 in our community so that we can get on top of it as quickly as possible. People will now be asking, as they have been for a few days, what does this mean in terms of lifting some of the restrictions that we've had in place? The Chief Minister will have more to say about this tomorrow, but it's important to emphasise that it is not a race to lift restrictions. Some of the announcements that have been made in other jurisdictions are pretty much in line with some of the arrangements that were already in place in the ACT. So here in the ACT, you've already been allowed to go and visit another person's house as long as it's only 1 or 2 people together, and as long as those physical distancing arrangements can be maintained. That's 1 person every 4 square metres, or staying 1.5 metres apart. But we will have more to say tomorrow on some of the other measures that we'll be looking at over the next little while. But again, it's not a race. We do need to maintain our vigilance in relation to COVID-19. We know that this virus and this disease continues to exist in Australia. We cannot close our borders in the ACT. We are an island in New South Wales, and we are part of a broader region where people live and work to cross the border all the time. So we have to do things in line with National Cabinet, bearing in mind what is happening in New South Wales, but also things that work for our community. I'll now hand over to Dr. Coleman to just give a brief update on whatever it is. No, she's telling me she has nothing additional to add at this point in time, so we're open for questions.
Minister, how worried are you about complacency setting in now in the ACT?
Look, I think people have been really, really good. And as I talk to people, and I made a few phone calls to constituents last night, and so did some volunteers on my behalf. And I think people are really understanding why we have taken the measures that we have. And they're watching, they're watching their televisions, they're seeing what's happened around the world. They're seeing what's happened in other countries as restrictions have started to be lifted from a lockdown situation, and they've started to see that second wave. So I think people understand the need to be measured and cautious in our approach as we start to move towards lifting restrictions. Of course, we will see some people who will think that the current situation with no active cases means that they can be a bit more relaxed. I would encourage people not to be complacent. It's part of the reason that we're doing this wider testing for the next week and a bit to ensure that we really understand where we are at, and also to remind people that it only takes one case to start a new chain of transmission and a new cluster. So we really don't have room for complacency. And to remind people that we're going to be in this for a long time. There is no vaccine. There is no effective cure for COVID-19 beyond the standard treatment for respiratory distress. So we are going to be facing this global pandemic for some months to come, and we will need to face up to that as a community and work through that together and what that means. We will not be going back, even as we ease restrictions, to the situation we had in November or even February. We will not be gathering together again in large groups in thousands of people for some time yet. But the work that the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee and National Cabinet is doing to work through what those scenarios look like over the next few weeks is really important for setting that benchmark for people's expectations.
The Chief Minister's already flagged that schools will be one of the first things that may sort of go back as restrictions ease. Do you think now that we have no active cases, it's the time to send kids back to the classroom?
I think Minister Berry, the Deputy Chief Minister and Minister for Education, has been really clear that she will continue to work with teachers, with their unions and with parents and their representatives on how we gradually transition back to face-to-face learning. But we are really, really well set up here in the ACT for remote learning. We already had a program in place where we were distributing Chromebooks to high school students, and then very quickly were able to do that for years 4 to 6. Teachers have worked incredibly hard to develop the resources to support parents and carers to undertake remote learning at home, and teachers are continuing to work hard to deliver that remote learning. So we again don't see the need to rush and make knee-jerk decisions and responses to what other jurisdictions might announce. And it's also really important to note that other jurisdictions haven't immediately return to face-to-face teaching either. Other jurisdictions are taking different types of staged approaches, and that's what we'll do in consultation with teachers and parents.
We've seen the NT announce its first exit strategy, essentially, and they've got 3 active cases at the moment. So looking into the ACT, what's the criteria or the factors that you're considering when you're thinking about lifting those restrictions?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that the Northern Territory had a lower number of cases to start with, and they have closed their borders. So they have had that capacity to really shut themselves off, and that's enabled them to then open up internally. Obviously, as I said, the ACT isn't in a position to shut our borders. We are part of New South Wales, and there are still active cases in New South Wales, and we need to be factoring that into our consideration. But some of the things that we're thinking about are what are low-risk activities, maybe how many more people can gather together without significantly increasing the risk. What are some of the more important economic drivers as well? What is going to get people back to work and get the economy moving again, that it again is a lower risk activity? So those are the things that we're weighing up as we consider what those easing of restrictions might look like over the next week and over the next month.
You're in the middle of building a $23 million emergency department pop-up facility. What's going to happen to that now?
Yeah, I think it's really important first to say that the build cost is not $23 million. So the $23 million was building and operational expenses to the end of June or July. So that facility the construction of that is well progressed, and we'll continue to build that temporary surge facility on the Garran Oval in case we need it into the future. But we were really clear when construction started on that surge facility that the best case scenario would be that we actually wouldn't need it, that we would manage to flatten the curve to the extent where we wouldn't need expanded emergency department capacity. And again, what we were looking at that time when that decision was made almost a month ago, probably a month ago now, was flooded emergency departments around the world, ICUs that couldn't cope around the world. And we didn't know where we would be in 4 weeks' time. We didn't know whether we would have flattened the curve or whether we would be seeing more cases. So it really was a precautionary approach, understanding that once you're in that situation, it's too late to build that extra capacity. So we're still working through whether we will use that facility for something COVID related or whether we will keep it there available in case we do see a second wave and we do see the need for specific emergency department capacity to respond to COVID-19.
Are you anticipating a second wave?
Look, I think that is what we have seen around the world, is as restrictions have been eased, more cases have come back. Of course, that's been largely in situations where there were existing active cases in the community. And that's one of the things that National Cabinet will be talking through. What are the realistic projections for Australia? We've been working really on a suppression strategy, on a flatten the curve strategy, not really on an elimination strategy. But now we've got to a point where we are very close to very few active cases in the whole of Australia. So that's the work I think that AHPPC needs to work through with National Cabinet, with their epidemiological modelling experts, as to what the potential future scenarios are for us. And that's really what will guide the next round of decision making.
That's the Health Minister of the ACT. The Territory has become the first Australian jurisdiction to eliminate all known cases of COVID-19. The last 2 Canberrans to have the infectious disease have both now recovered. The Minister there says the state and Australia is prepared for any emergence of a second wave of the virus. And the Chief Minister, we were told, will speak about the future of restrictions tomorrow. Scenes of empty streets, sports arenas and airports have been among the new and strange aspects of the coronavirus crisis. To document the lockdown impact, photographers have ventured into deserted cities and towns, and their work has been turned into an online essay for the ABC News website. Digital journalist and photographer Margie Buren says it's a unique period to capture.
Well, I guess we all know that we're going through some pretty crazy, unprecedented times at the moment, and we wanted to capture a bit of that history and document it in photography. Because I guess already in many ways, a lot of us have started saying that this way of life is already feeling a little bit normal. And so we wanted to capture that abnormal, the abnormal images that you are not seeing from home, the spaces that are now empty and look really strange without us in them.
We're seeing some of the pictures now. I think that's Bondi Beach there. Did you go all over Australia?
We did. We went to different parts, every state and territory, and also into some of our regional areas like Cairns, the New South Wales North Coast, Geraldton, WA, Launceston in Tassie. So we drew on a range of talent that we have across the ABC in all of our stations to bring these images together.
When were most of the pictures taken? At what stage of the lockdowns were people out and about?
They've all been taken in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So obviously already some of the restrictions have been easing. So for example, like the Bondi images are already looking very different to what is happening today because the images that we've got are from drone images of empty sand that looks completely strange without all the tourists and completely empty water as well. So already we're starting to see that these images captured a little moment in time that are already changing.
Yeah. How did you decide which locations to feature? Because you can't include everything, can you?
Well, that was the really tough one, I guess. And I mean, we were largely sort of driven by where we had some of our best photographers around the country. So we reached out to them and called for their ideas. But we did want a mixture of locations and spaces. So places that are important in our lifestyle that we've been, off limit, that have been off limits to us. So restaurants, beaches, playgrounds, theme parks, airports, all of the things that look completely eerily strange without people in them and not knowing when people will return to them.
Which is your favourite image, Margie?
Well, I love that ferry shot. That's actually probably my favourite image with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background.
It's amazing.
Yeah. My favourite image to actually take was of the MCG because it was just, walking into the stadium. I kind of thought it might feel a bit like, a non-game day walking into the stadium. But when I walked onto the ground, it was just so quiet because normally you'd hear the buzz of, trolleys that have got catering, or you've got the beeping of buggies beneath in the car park. But that was dead quiet. There was no planes going over. There were no cars on the busy roads that are normally surrounding the MCG. And when I looked around at those empty 100,000 spaces that would normally be filled with people, it just felt so eerie, thinking, when will this actually ever be used like this again? So it's the longest time that these seats haven't had people watching sport since the Second World War. So that just felt a bit strange, a bit eerie.
It is really a historical record, isn't it? Because slowly restrictions we've been hearing today will be lifted and are being lifted, many from tomorrow. Already there seem to be more people around. These images really are documenting scenes that hopefully will never be seen again. You must be very proud of the whole project.
Well, I guess that's the thing. When I visited the State Library, there were a couple of exhibitions up capturing the Great Depression and the Gold Rush, and it did make me think, well, we're actually living a piece of history ourselves right now, and it is important to document it. And like everyone else, I mean, I've been at home for a lot of the last few weeks, so it was definitely strange when I did venture out, and when all of our other photographers ventured out to get these shots. It was a strange feeling and a strange thing to witness and capture.
Margie, thank you.
Thanks, Ros.
Quick look at the national weather now. Brisbane, a shower or two with a possible late storm. Rain at times with a possible storm in Sydney. Canberra, rain at times. Melbourne, showers easing. Rain in Hobart, showers in Adelaide, and sunny in Perth and in Darwin. That's ABC News for now. Kirsten Aiken will have more on our top stories coming up on the ABC News channel. I'm Ros Childs. Thanks for watching.
Nothing compares with this. Nothing. It's a different world.
7:30's special coverage.
This virus could still circulate at low levels and then reappear again.
With the latest facts and information.
Testing, tracing and response. They are the three weapons we need.
When prevention works, nothing happens. But we can't lose vigilance.
Comprehensive coverage all week.
You are our best hope of stopping coronavirus.
7:30 tonight, ABC and iView.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, West End royalty will be joined by the extraordinary music